Jewish Power by Paul Eisen, August 19, 2004. Preface. The crime against the Palestinian people is being committed by a Jewish state with Jewish soldiers using weapons displaying Jewish religious symbols and with the full support and complicity of the overwhelming mass of organized Jews worldwide. But to name Jews as responsible for this crime seems impossible to do. Introduction. The future is always open and nothing can ever be ruled out. But for now, it's hard to see how Israel can be stopped. After over 50 years, it is clear that Israel will only relinquish its eliminationist attitude to Palestinians and Palestinian life when it has to. This need not be through military action, but it is hard to see how anything else will do. The conventional wisdom that if America turned off the tap, Israel would be brought to its knees is far from proven. First, it's not going to happen. Second, those who believe it may well be underestimating both the cohesiveness of Israeli society and the force of Jewish history which permeates it. Even more unlikely is the military option. The only force on earth which could possibly confront Israel is the American military, and, again, that is not going to happen. Palestinian resistance has been astonishing. After over 50 years of brutal assault, by what may well one day be seen as one of the most ruthless and irrational powers of modern times, and with just about every power on earth ranged against them, Palestinians are still with us, still steadfast, still knowing who they are and where they come from. Nonetheless, for the time being, effective resistance may be over, though the possibility of organized, nonviolent resistance can never be ruled out. And, for now, the only strategy open may be no more than one for survival. For us, it is so much easier to deny this reality than to accept it, and doubtless the struggle will continue. How fruitful this will be, no one can say. Although the present seems hopeless, survival is still vital, and no one knows when new opportunities may arise. Anyway, to struggle against injustice is always worth doing. But what if the struggle becomes so delusional that it inhibits rather than advances resistance? What if the struggle becomes a way of avoiding rather than confronting reality? Those slogans, "End the Occupation" and "Two States for Two Peoples" are now joined by a new slogan, "The One-State Solution." This is every bit as fantastic as its predecessors, because just as there never was going to be an end to the occupation, nor a real Palestinian state, so, for now, there is no possibility of any one state other than the state of Israel, which now stretches from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, and the only solution is a final solution, and even that cannot be ruled out. Chapter 1. Zionism is not Judaism. Judaism is not Zionism. The crime against the Palestinian people is being committed by a Jewish state with Jewish soldiers using weapons with Jewish religious symbols all over them, and with the full support and complicity of the overwhelming mass of organized Jews worldwide. But to name Jews as responsible for this crime seems impossible to do. The past is just too terrible. All of us know of the hatred and violence to which accusations against Jews have led in the past. Also, if we were to examine critically the role of Jews in this conflict, what would become of us and of our struggle? Would we be labeled anti-Semites and lose much of the support that we have worked so hard to gain? The present, too, is full of ambiguities. Zionism is not Judaism. Judaism is not. Zionism has become an article of faith, endlessly repeated, as is the assertion that Zionism is a secular ideology opposed, for much of its history, by the bulk of religious Jews, and even now still opposed by true Torah Jews, such as Neturei Karta. But Zionism is now at the heart of Jewish life, with religious Jews amongst the most virulent of Zionists and Neturei Karta. Despite their impeccable anti-Zionism, their beautiful words, and the enthusiasm with which they are welcomed at solidarity rallies, etc., may well be just Jews in fancy dress, a million miles from the reality of Jewish life. And even if Zionism can still be disentangled from Judaism, can it be distinguished from a broader Jewish identity or Jewishness? So often Zionism is proclaimed to be a modern add-on to Jewish identity, another, albeit anachronistic, settler colonial ideology, simply adopted by Jews in response to their predicament. But could it be that our need to avoid the accusation of anti-Semitism and our own conflicted perceptions and feelings, our insistence that Zionism and Jewishness are separate, has led us seriously to misunderstand the situation? Has our refusal to look squarely at the very Jewishness of Zionism and its crimes caused us to fail to understand exactly what we are up against? Chapter 2. Jews, Judaism and Zionism. Jews are complex. Jewish identity is complex, and the relationship between Judaism, the religion, and a broader, often secular Jewish identity or Jewishness is very complex indeed. Jewishness may be experienced a long way from synagogue, yeshiva, or any other formal aspect of Jewish religious life, yet is often still inextricably bound to Judaism. That is why secular Jews are able to proclaim their secularity every bit as loudly as they proclaim their Jewishness. Mark Ellis, a religious Jew, says that when you look at those Jews who are in solidarity with Palestinians, the overwhelming majority of them are secular, but from a religious point of view, the covenant is with them. For Ellis, these secular Jews, unknowingly and even unwillingly, may be carrying with them the future of Jewish life. Jewish identity, connecting Jews to other Jews, comes from deep within Jewish history. This is a shared history, both real and imagined, in that it is both literal and theological. Many Jews in the West share a real history of living together as a distinct people in Eastern, Central, and then Western Europe and America. Others share a real history of settlement in Spain, followed by expulsion, and then settlement all over the world, particularly in Arab and Islamic lands. But this may not be what binds all Jews, because for all Jews, it is not a real, but maybe a theological history that is shared. Most Palestinians today probably have more Hebrew blood in their little fingers than most Western Jews have in their whole bodies. And yet, the story of the Exodus from Egypt is as real to many of them, and most importantly, was as real to them when they were children, as if they, along with all Jews, had stood with Moses at the foot of Mount Sinai. And histories like that don't stop at the present. Even for secular Jews, though unacknowledged and even unrealized, there is a sense not only of a shared history, but also of a shared destiny. Central to Jewish identity, both religious and non-religious, is the sense of mission centered on exile and return. How else to explain the extraordinary devotion of so many Jews, religious and secular, to the return to a land with which, in real terms, they have very little connection at all? For many Jews, this history confers a specialness. This is not unique to Jews. After all, who in their heart of hearts does not feel a little bit special? But for Jews, this specialness is at the center of their self-identification, and much of the world seems to concur. For religious Jews, the specialness comes from the supposed covenant with God. But for secular Jews, the specialness comes from a special history. In either case, this can be a good and even a beautiful thing. In much of Jewish religious tradition, this specialness is no more than a special moral obligation, a special responsibility to offer an example to the world. And for so many secular Jews, it has led them to struggle for justice in many places around the world. At the heart of this Jewish specialness is Jewish suffering and victimhood. Like the shared history itself, this suffering may, but need not, correspond to reality. Jews have certainly suffered, but their suffering remains unexamined and unexplained. The Holocaust, now the paradigm of Jewish suffering, has long ceased to be a piece of history and is now treated by religious and secular alike as a piece of theology, a sacred text almost, and therefore beyond scrutiny. And the suffering never ends. No matter how much Jews have suffered, they are certainly not suffering now, but for many Jews, their history of suffering is not just an unchallengeable past, but also a possible future. So, no matter how safe Jews may be, many feel just a hair's breadth away from Auschwitz. Zionism is at the heart of this. Zionism is also complex and also comes from deep within Jewish history with the same sense of exile and return. Zionism also confirms that Jews are special in their suffering and is explicit that Jews should return to a land given to them, and only them, by God if they are religious, or by history if they are not, because they simply are not safe anywhere else on earth. But so what? If Jews think that they are a people with a religious link to a land and have a deep wish to return, why should we care? So long as the land is not already populated by Palestinians, and if Jews feel that they are special and that God has made some kind of special arrangement with them, so what? So long as this does not lead them to demand preferential treatment and to discriminate against others. And if Jews feel that they have suffered like no one else on the face of the earth, fine. So long as they do not use this suffering to justify the imposition of suffering on others and to blackmail morally the whole world into quiescent silence. This is the problem with Zionism. It expresses Jewish identity, but also empowers it. It tells Jews and many others too, that Jews can do what Jews have always dreamed of doing. It takes the perfectly acceptable religious feelings of Jews, or, if you prefer, the perfectly harmless delusions of Jews, and tries to turn them into a terrible reality. Jewish notions of specialness, choseness, and even supremacism are fine for a small, wandering people, but when empowered with a state, an army, and F-16 become a concern for us all. Zionism as Jewish empowerment and statehood changes everything. Israel is not just any state, it is a Jewish state, and this means more than just a state for Jews. This Jewish state is built on traditions and modes of thought that have evolved amongst Jews for centuries, amongst which are the notions that Jews are special and that their suffering is special. By their own reckoning, Jews are a nation that dwells alone. It is us and them, and in many cases, us or them. And these tendencies are translated into the modern state of Israel. This is a state that knows no boundaries. It is a state that both believes and uses as justification for its own aggression the notion that its very survival is always at stake, so anything is justified to ensure that survival. Israel is a state that manifestly believes that the rules of both law and humanity, applicable to all other states, do not apply to it. Chapter 3, Their Own Worst Nightmare. It is a terrible irony that this empowerment of Jews has come to most resemble those empowerments under which Jews have suffered the most. Empowered Christianity, also a marriage of faith and power, enforced its ideology and pursued its dissidents and enemies with no greater fervor than has empowered Judaism. In its zeal and self-belief, Zionism has come to resemble the most brutal and relentless of modern ideologies. But unlike the brutal rationality of Stalinism, willing to sacrifice millions for political and economic revolution, this Jewish ideology, in its zealotry and irrationality, resembles more than National Socialism, which condemned millions for the attainment of a nonsensical racial and ethnic supremacy. Of course, there are differences, but there are also similarities. National Socialism, like Zionism, another blend of mysticism and power, gained credibility as a means to right wrongs done to a victimized people. National Socialism, like Zionism, also sought to maintain the racial, ethnic purity of one group and to maintain the rights of that ethnic group over others. And National Socialism, like Zionism, also proposed an almost mystical attachment of that group to a land. Also, both National Socialism and Zionism shared a common interest: to separate Jews from non-Jews, in this case to remove Jews from Europe, and actively cooperated in the attainment of this aim. And if the similarity between these two ideologies is simply too great and too bitter to accept, one may ask what National Socialism with its uniforms, flags, and mobilized youth must have looked like to those Germans, desperate after Versailles and the ravages of post-First World War Germany. Perhaps not so different from how the uniforms, flags, and marching youth of pre- and post-state Zionism must have looked to Jews after their history of suffering, and particularly after the Holocaust. This is, for Jews, their own worst nightmare. The thing they love the most has become the thing they hate the most. And for those Jews and others who shrink from the comparison, let them ask themselves this: what would an average German, an enthusiastic Nazi even, have said in, say, 1938, had they been confronted with the possibility of an Auschwitz? They would have thought that you were stark, staring mad. Chapter 4, American Jews and Jewish America. At the heart of the conflict is the relationship between Israel and America. The statistics, billions in aid and loans, UN vetoes, etc., need not be repeated here. American support for Israel seems limitless. But what is the nature of the support? For many, perhaps most, the answer is relatively simple. Israel is a client state of America, serving American interests, or, more particularly, the interests of its power elites. This view is underpinned by the obvious importance of oil, the huge strategic importance of the region, and the fact that if Israel did not further the interests of those who control America, then we can be sure America would not support Israel. Also, there is no doubt that in the IDF, America has found a marvelously flexible and effective force, easily aroused and let loose whenever any group of Arabs get a little above themselves. But is this the whole story? Does Israel really serve America's interests, and is their relationship wholly based on the sharing of these interests? Consider how much in terms of goodwill from other nations, America loses by its support for Israel, and consider the power and influence of the Jewish, Zionist, or pro-Israel lobby, as when many an otherwise responsible lawmaker, faced with the prospect of an intervention in their re-election campaign from the Jewish lobby, seems happy to put his or her re-election prospects way in front of what is good for America. The details of the workings of AIPAC and others, and the mechanics by which these groups exert pressure on America's lawmakers and governors, have been dealt with elsewhere. We need only note that this interest group is undoubtedly extraordinarily effective and successful. Not just a small group of Jews supporting Israel, as its supporters would have us believe. These are powerful and committed ideologues, billionaires, media magnates, politicians, activists, and religious leaders. In any event, the power of the Jewish lobby to make or break pretty well any public figure is legendary. Not for nothing is it often referred to simply as the lobby. But again, there may be far more to the Israel-US relationship than just a commonality of interest in the effectiveness of certain interest groups. That support for Israel must be in the interests of those who control America is certainly true. But who controls America? Perhaps the real relationship is not between Israel and America, but between Jews and America. The overwhelming majority of Jews in America live their lives just like any other Americans. They've done well and are undoubtedly pleased that America supports their fellow Jews in Israel, but that's as far as it goes. Nonetheless, an awful lot of Jews certainly do control an awful lot of America. Not the industrial muscle of America, the steel, transport, etc., nor the oil and arms industries, those traditional money spinners. No, if Jews have influence anywhere in America, it's not over its muscle and sinew, but over its blood and its brain. It is in finance and the media that we find a great many Jews in very influential positions. Lists abound, though you have to go to some pretty unpopular websites to find them, of Jews prominent in financial and cultural life. Jews in banks, Jews in Forbes magazine's Richest Americans, Jews in Hollywood, Jews in TV, Jewish journalists, writers, critics, etc., etc. Nor have Jews been slow in exploiting their position. Jews have not hesitated to use whatever resources they have to advance their interests as they see them. Nor does one need to subscribe to any conspiracy theory to note how natural it is for Jews in the media to promote Jews and their values as positive and worthy of emulation. When did anyone last see a Jew portrayed in anything other than a favorable light? Jews are clever, moral, interesting, intense, warm, witty, complex, ethical, contradictory, prophetic, infuriating, sometimes irritating, but always utterly engaging. Nor is it any wonder that Jews in influential positions are inclined to promote what they see as Jewish collective interests. Is it really all that incredible that Jewish advisors around the presidency bear Israel's interests at heart when they advise the president on foreign affairs? But so what? So there are a lot of Jews with a lot of money and a lot of Jews with a lot to say and the means to say it. If Jews, by virtue of their ability and use of resources, as honestly gained as by anyone else, promote what they perceive as their own collective interest, what's wrong with that? First, with some notable exceptions, the vast majority of Jews can, in good faith, lay hands on hearts and swear that they never take decisions or actions with collective Jewish interests in mind, certainly not consciously. And even if they did, they are acting no differently from anyone else. With a few exceptions, Jews have earned their advantageous positions. They came with nothing, played according to the rules, and if they use their influence to further what they perceive as Jewish interests, what's so special about that? Do not the Poles, the Ukrainians, the gun lobby, the Christian evangelicals also not work to further their group interests? The difference between Jews and other groups is that they probably do it better. Jews are, by pretty well any criteria, easily the most successful ethnic group in America, and for whatever reason, have been extraordinarily successful in promoting themselves both individually and collectively. And there would probably be nothing wrong with this were it not for the fact that these same people who exert so much control and influence over American life also seem to refuse to be held accountable. It is the surreptitiousness with which Jews are perceived to have achieved their success which arouses suspicion. Jews certainly seem cagey about the influence they have. Just breathe the words Jewish power and wait for the reaction. They claim it's because this charge has so often been used as a precursor to discrimination and violence against them, but never consider the possibility that their own reluctance to discuss the power they wield arouses suspicion and even hostility. But there is another claim, subtler and more worrying. This is that it doesn't exist, that Jews do not wield power, that there is no Jewish lobby, that Jews in America do not exert power and influence to advance Jewish interests, even that there are no such things as Jewish interests. There are no Jewish interests in the war in Iraq. There are no Jewish interests in America. Most amazing, there are no Jewish interests even in Israel and Palestine. There is no Jewish collective. Jews do not act together to advance their aims. They even say that the pro-Israeli lobby has actually not all that much to do with Jews, that the Jewishness of Israel is irrelevant, and the public affairs committees, PATIs, which lobby so hard for Israel, are in fact doing no more than supporting an ally and thus looking after America's best interests, even to the extent of concealing their true purpose behind names such as American for Better Citizenship, Citizens Organized PAC, or the National PAC, none of which make one reference in their titles to Israel, Zionism, or Jews. Similarly, Jews and Jewish organizations are said to be not so much furthering Jewish interests and values as American, or even universal interests and values. So, the major Holocaust museum, styled as a Museum of Tolerance, focuses not only on anti-Semitism, but on every kind of intolerance known to mankind, except that shown by Jews to non-Jews in Israel and Palestine. Similarly, the Anti-Defamation League is but an organization for the promotion of universal principles of tolerance and justice, not just for Jews, but for everyone. This conflation of Jewish interests with American interests is nowhere more stark than in present American foreign policy. If ever an image was reminiscent of a Jewish world conspiracy, the spectacle of the Jewish neocons gathered around the current presidency and directing policy in the Middle East, this must be it. But we are told that the fact that the Jewish neocons, many with links with right-wing political groups within Israel, are in the forefront of urging a pro-Israel policy is but a coincidence, and any suggestion that these figures might be influenced by their Jewishness and their links with Israel is immediately marginalized as reviving old anti-Semitic myths about Jewish dual loyalty. The idea that American intervention in Iraq, the one viable military counterweight to Israeli hegemony in the Middle East, and therefore an inspiration to Arab and Palestinian resistance, primarily serves Israeli rather than American interests, has also been consigned to the netherworld of medieval anti-Semitic myth. The suggestion that those Jews around the president act from motives other than those to promote the interests of all Americans is just anti-Semitic raving, and maybe they're right. Perhaps those who promote Jewish interests are in fact promoting American interests because, for now at least, they appear to be one and the same. Chapter 5, Chapter 6, Jewish America. In Washington, D.C. is a memorial to a terrible tragedy, not a memorial to a tragedy visited on Americans by a foreign power as at Pearl Harbor or 9/11, nor to a tragedy visited by Americans on Americans, such the sacking of Atlanta. Nor is it a memorial of contrition to a tragedy inflicted by Americans onto another people, such as to slavery or to the history of racial injustice in America. It is to none of these. The Holocaust Memorial is to a tragedy inflicted on people who were not Americans, by people who were not Americans, and in a place a very long way from America. And the co-religionists, or even, if you like, the co-nationals of the people on whom the tragedy was visited and to whom the memorial is built, make up around 2% of the American population. How is it that a group of people who make up such a tiny percentage of the overall American population can command such respect and regard that a memorial to them is built in the symbolic heart of American national life? The Jewish narrative is now at the center of American life, certainly that of its cultural and political elites. There is, anyway, much in the way that Americans choose to see themselves and their history, which is quite naturally compatible with the way Jews see themselves and their history. What more fitting paradigm for a country founded on immigration than the story of the mass immigration of Jews at the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries? For many Americans, the story of those Jews who came to their goldenest Medina, their golden land, with nothing and, through hard work and perseverance, made it to the very top of American society, is also their story. And what could be more inspirational for a country, if not officially, but still viscerally, deeply Christian, than the story of the Jews, Jesus' own people and God's chosen people, returning to their ancient homeland and transforming it into a modern state? And for a nation which sees itself as a beacon of democracy in the world, what better international soulmate than the State of Israel, widely held to be the only democracy in the Middle East? Finally, what greater validation for a country itself, founded on a narrative of conquest and ethnic cleansing, than the biblical narrative of the conquest and ethnic cleansing of the Promised Land, with the addition of the equally violent settlement of modern Palestine, with its own ethnic cleansing and then making the desert bloom? Most resonant, of course, is the notion of Jews as a suffering people. The fact that this suffering people is now enjoying a success beyond the dreams of any other ethnic group in America seems irrelevant. Also ignored is how American Jews have made it to the very top of American society, whilst every step of the way complaining about how much they're being discriminated against. Nonetheless, to America, Jews have an enduring and ongoing history of suffering and victimhood. But this history has rarely been examined or even discussed. Chapter 7. A Suffering People. That Jews have suffered is undeniable, but Jewish suffering is claimed to have been so enduring, so intense, and so particular that it is to be treated differently from other sufferings. The issue is complex and cannot be fully debated or decided here, but the following points may stimulate thought and discussion. During even the most terrible times of Jewish suffering, such as the Crusades or the Chmielnitsky massacres of 17th century Ukraine, and even more so at other times in history, it has been said that the average peasant would have given his eye teeth to be a Jew. The meaning is clear. Generally speaking, and throughout most of their history, the condition of Jews was often far superior to the mass of the population. The above-mentioned Ukrainian massacres took place in the context of a peasant uprising against the oppression of the Ukrainian peasantry by their Polish overlords. As has often been the case, Jews were seen as occupying a traditional position of being in alliance with the ruling class in their oppression of the peasantry. Chmielnitsky, the leader of this popular uprising, is today a Ukrainian national hero, not for his assaults on Jews. There are even references to his having offered poor Jews to join the uprising against their exploitative co-religionists the Jews declined, but for his championing of the rights of the oppressed Ukrainians. Again, the inference is plain. Outbreaks of anti-Semitic violence, though never justified, have often been responses to Jewish behavior, both real and imaginary. In the Holocaust, 3 million Polish Jews died, but so did 3 million non-Jewish Poles. Jews were targeted, but so were Gypsies, homosexuals, Slavs, and Poles. Similarly, the church burned Jews for their dissenting beliefs, but then the church burned everyone for their dissenting beliefs. So again, the question must be asked, what's so special about Jewish suffering? The Holocaust, the paradigm for all anti-Semitism and all Jewish suffering, is treated as being beyond examination and scrutiny. Questioning the Holocaust narrative is, at best, socially unacceptable, leading often to social exclusion and discrimination, and, at worst, in some places, is illegal and subject to severe penalty. Holocaust revisionist scholars, named Holocaust deniers by their opponents, have challenged this. They do not deny a brutal and extensive assault on Jews by the Nazi regime, but they do deny the Holocaust narrative as framed by present-day establishments and elites. Specifically, their denial is limited to 3 main areas. First, they deny that there ever was an official plan on the part of Hitler or any other part of the Nazi regime, systematically and physically to eliminate every Jew in Europe. Second, they deny that there ever existed homicidal gas chambers. Third, they claim that the numbers of Jewish victims of the Nazi assault have been greatly exaggerated, but none of this is the point. Whether those who question the Holocaust narrative are revisionist scholars striving to find the truth and shamelessly persecuted for opposing a powerful faction, or whether they are crazy Jew haters, denying a tragedy and defaming its victims, the fact is that one may question the Armenian genocide, one may freely discuss the slave trade, one can say that the murder of millions of Igbos, Kampucheans, and Rwandans never took place, and that the moon is but a piece of green cheese floating in space, but one may not question the Jewish Holocaust. Why? Because, like the rest of the Jewish history of suffering, the Holocaust underpins the narrative of Jewish innocence, which is used to bewilder and befuddle any attempt to see and to comprehend Jewish power and responsibility in Israel, Palestine, and elsewhere in the world. Chapter 8. Jewish Power. What is a Jew? Israel Shamir, the Russian-born Israeli writer, advocates the right of all people, whatever their ethnicity or religion, to live together in complete equality between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. Shamir condemns the behavior of Israel and of diaspora Jews and calls for an end to their preferential treatment. But he also proposes an opposition to Judaism itself, for which he stands accused of being anti-Jewish, a charge he does not deny, but actually embraces. Shamir proposes the existence of a Jewish ideology, or Jewish paradigm as he puts it, and proposes that it is the voluntary adherence to this spirit which makes a Jew into a Jew. For him, Jewishness is neither race nor ethnicity. There is, for Shamir, no such thing as a Jewish tribe or family, no biological or ethnic body from which there can be no escape. Further, this ideology, based on notions of choseness, exclusivity, and even supremacism, is, at least when empowered, incompatible with peace, equality, and justice in Palestine, or anywhere else for that matter. No one wants to oppose any Jews simply for being Jews, or even for what they believe, but only because of what they do. The problem is that since, according to Shamir, what Jews believe and even do is precisely what makes them into Jews, so opposition to Jewishness as an ideology surely comes dangerously close to opposition to Jews simply for being Jews. But for Shamir, Jews are Jews because they choose to be Jews. Someone may be born of Jews and raised as a Jew, but they can, if they wish, reject their Jewish upbringing and become a non-Jew. And many have done just that, including such famous escapees as Karl Marx, St. Paul, Leon Trotsky, and Shamir himself, etc. Opposition to Jews is not, therefore, like opposition to blacks or to Asians or to other common racist attitudes, since the object of the opposition is perfectly able to relinquish the ideology in question. Shamir has never in any way called for any harm to be done to Jews or anyone else, nor for Jews or anyone else to be discriminated against in any way. Adherence to this Jewish ideology is, for Shamir, regrettable, but not in itself a matter for active opposition. Nor does this mean that Shamir is opposed to any individual Jew just because he or she is a Jew. What Shamir actively opposes is not Jews, but Jewry. Analogous to, say, the Catholic Church, Jewry consists of those organized Jews and their leaders who actively promote corrosive Jewish interests and values, particularly now in the oppression of the Palestinians. One doesn't have to be in complete agreement with Shamir to understand what he is talking about. Why should Jews not have a spirit? After all, such a concept has been discussed with regard to other nations. It is dangerous, wrong, to speak about the Germans or any other people as of a single undifferentiated entity and include all individuals in one judgment. And yet I don't think I would deny that there exists a spirit of each people, otherwise it would not be a people. A Deutschtum, an Italianitia, and Hispanidad. They are the sums of traditions, customs, history, language, and culture. Whoever does not feel within himself this spirit, which is national in the best sense of the word, not only does not entirely belong to his own people, but is not part of human civilization. Therefore, while I consider insensate the syllogism, all Italians are passionate. You are Italian, therefore you are passionate. I do, however, believe it legitimate within certain limits to expect from Italians taken as a whole, or from Germans, etc., one specific collective behavior rather than another. There will certainly be individual exceptions, but a prudent probabilistic forecast is, in my opinion, possible. Primo Levi. And for Jews it is perhaps even more appropriate. The place of Judaism as an ideology at the center for all Jewish identity may be debated, but few would dispute that Judaism is at least at the historic heart of Jewishness, and, whatever else may bind Jews together, it is certainly true that religion plays an important part. Second, for a group of people who have retained such a strong collective identity, with no shared occupation of any land, language, nor even in many cases a culture, it is hard to see what else there could be that makes Jews into Jews. Surely for Jews, in the absence of other, more obvious factors, it is precisely such a spirit that has enabled them to retain their distinctive identity for so long, and in the face of such opposition. But if there is some kind of Jewish spirit or ideology, what is it? As far as Judaism, the religion, goes, it seems fairly clear that there is an ideology based on the election of Israel by God, the special relationship Jews are supposed to have with God, and the special mission allocated to Jews by God. So, for observant Jews, there is a special quality intrinsic to the covenant and to Judaism itself, though not all of them find it appealing. There is a strain in Jewish thought that says there is a special godly something or other that is passed down in a certain genetic line which confers a special quality on people, and Jewishness is a special quality. I call that metaphysical racism. Rabbi Mark Solomon. But whilst easy to see such a common spirit in religious Jews, after all, it is precisely that which makes them religious. It is so much harder to define it in secular Jews. Those Jews who reject, often quite vociferously, all aspects of Jewish faith. They often claim that they don't have an ideology, or that their ideology is one of, say, the left. Not only not Jewish, but opposed to all religions, including Judaism. Yet, seemingly so free of all such ignorant superstition, these same people still call themselves Jews, still more often than not marry other Jews, and still turn up to solidarity rallies, only with other Jews and under Jewish banners. What is their ideology? For my money, it is much the same sense of specialness found in religious Jews, but with a special reference to victimhood. Yes, but only in the Hitlerian sense, answered philosopher Maxim Rodinson when asked if he still considered himself a Jew. For many of these Jews, it is their identity as a threatened and victimized people that makes them Jews. Hitler said, "I was a Jew, so I may as well be a Jew," is one response, or to be a Jew somehow denies all those who ever persecuted Jews a victory, so I'm a Jew. For these Jews, albeit estranged from Jewish religious and often community life as well, Emil Fackenheim's famous post-Holocaust 614th commandment, to add to the other 613, "Thou shalt survive," is an absolute imperative. But whatever the motive, this self-identity runs very deep indeed. Amongst these Jews, no matter how left or progressive they may be, one may criticize Israel to the nth degree, poke fun at the Jewish establishment, and even shamefully denigrate Judaism as a religion, but depart one iota from the approved text on anti-Semitism and Jewish suffering, and you are in deep trouble. For these rational folk, Jewish suffering and anti-Semitism is every bit as inexplicable, mysterious, and therefore unchallengeable as for any religious Jew. Jewish secularism is often offered as evidence that there is no such thing as a Jewish identity gathered around any shared ideology. After all, if all Jews subscribe to the same basic ideology, then how come so many Jews so obviously don't? And if all Jews essentially support the same interests, how come so many Jews so obviously don't? But is it that obvious? Not only do secular Jews very often seem to subscribe to Jewish notions of specialness and victimhood, but also in their attitudes to non-Jews in general and Palestinians in particular, they are by no means all that different from religious Jews. It is often quoted how many Jews are in solidarity movements with Palestinians and how many of these are secular. And it's true, there are many Jews in sympathy with the Palestinians, and the overwhelming majority are secular. And the main thrust of post-1967 virulent Zionism has come to be associated with the religious right. But this secular Jewish tradition, in fact, has been at the forefront of Zionism's assault on the Palestinians. It was secular labor Zionists who created the Zionist ideology and the pre-state Jewish-only society. It was secular Zionists, good, humanistic, left-wing kibbutzniks, who directed and carried out the ethnic cleansing of 750,000 Palestinians and the destruction of their towns and villages. It was secular Zionists who established the present state with all its discriminatory practices, and it was a largely secular labor government that held the Palestinian citizens of Israel under military government in their own land for 18 years. Finally, it was a secular labor government which conquered the West Bank and Gaza, and first built the settlements and embarked on the Oslo peace process, coolly designed to deceive the Palestinians into surrendering their rights. And even those secular Jews who do support Palestinian rights, on so many occasions, the solidarity they offer is limited by self-interest. That these people, at least as much as anyone else, act out of their highest motives may be true. Many have been lifelong activists for many causes, and many find their activism springs consciously or unconsciously from what they see as the highest ideals of their Jewishness. But nonetheless, for many of them, solidarity with Palestinians means, above all, the protection of Jews. They call for a Palestinian state on 22% of the Palestinian homeland, but only to keep and protect the Jewishness of the Jewish state. The Palestinian state they call for would inevitably be weak, dominated by the Israeli economy and under the guns of the Israeli military. Surely they must know what this would mean. At rally after rally, in speeches and on leaflets and banners, these Jews denounce the occupation. Down with the occupation, down with the occupation, down with the occupation. But not a word of the inherent injustice of a state for Jews only. Perhaps a mention of the ill-gotten gains of 1948, but nothing of the right of return of the refugees, no restitution, merely a just solution, taking account, of course, of Israel's demographic concerns. We are with you, we are with you, we are with you, they say. But whether it be condemnation of some form of Palestinian resistance of which they disapprove, or some real or perceived occurrence of anti-Semitism, for these Jews there is always a but. They should take a leaf from Henry Herskovits, He is part of an organization called Jewish Witnesses for Peace, which holds silent vigils outside synagogues on Shabbat. Of course, all the other Jewish activists are shrieking at him that you mustn't target Jews for protest, that you must draw a distinction between Jews, Israelis, and Zionists, that you'll only alienate the people we want to engage. But he doesn't care. He knows that support from the Jewish mainstream, as Tony Cliff, the Trotskyite, used to say, is like honey on your elbow. You can see it, you can smell it, but you can never quite taste it. Henry also knows that to say that Jews in America, individually and in their religious and community organizations, should not be held accountable for what is happening is a lie, and discredits all Jews before the non-Jewish world. So these secular Jews often end up being just another round of Michael Newman's veritable shell game of Jewish identity. Look, we're a religion. No, a race. No, a cultural entity. Sorry, a religion. Because this is the key to maintaining Jewish power. If it's indefinable, it's invisible. Like a stealth bomber, you can't see it on your radar, but you sure know when you've been hit. Jewish power, with its blurred outlines and changing forms, becomes invisible. And if you can't see it, you can't fight it. Meanwhile, the assault on the Palestinians continues. Chapter 9. The Jews. The phrase is itself terrifying because of its past association with discrimination and violence against Jews, but Jews themselves have no problem with it. The notion of a Jewish people is at the center of Jewish faith, with Jews of all or no degrees of religious adherence over and over again affirming its existence. It is also at the heart of Zionism, even in its most secular forms, and is written into the foundational texts of the State of Israel. The concept even received international legal approval when the Jewish people were declared by the West German state to be the post-war residual heirs of intestate Jews, and yet it is an absolute article of faith for everyone, including those in the Solidarity movement, that while we may criticize and confront Israel and Israelis, we may not criticize and confront the Jewish people and Jews. Unlike Israel and any other state, the Jewish people has no common policy, and any attack on the Jewish people is, therefore, aimed at what they are and not at what they do. But is speaking of the Jews doing this or doing that any more or less acceptable than speaking of, say, the Americans? If the American military lays waste a third world country, it is done by order of the government, a small group, with the full support of the ruling elites. Another small group, the tacit support of a substantial segment of the population, a larger group, the silent denial of probably the majority of the population, a very large group, and the opposition of a tiny minority, a small group. Is it all that different with Jews? It may be. Unlike the United States, the Jews are not a legally constituted body, and they do not have an obvious and defined common policy. The Jews do not have an officially designated leadership, nor do they inhabit one area of land, nor do they speak a common language, or even share a common culture. Theoretically, at least, there seem to be so many differences as to render any comparison untenable. In practice, this may not be the whole story. It is true that the Jews do not constitute a legally recognized body, but Zionism, with its claim to represent all Jews, has increasingly confused the issue. It is also true that the Zionists do not represent all Jews, but they do represent the views of very many Jews indeed, and certainly the most powerful and influential Jews. And there is no doubt that the overwhelming majority of organized Jews are fully behind the Zionist project. That the Jews do not have a formally designated leadership does not mean that they have no leadership. Bodies, again, to which the overwhelming majority of organized Jews owe allegiance: the Israeli government, the World Zionist Organization, numerous large and powerful Jewish organizations such as the Anti-Defamation League and the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, lesser bodies such as the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and similar organizations in every country in which Jews reside. Then there is the extensive network of Jewish bodies often linked through synagogues to the whole spectrum of mainstream Jewish religious and community life. All these bodies, with their vast and interconnected network, do provide leadership. They do have clearly defined policies, and they are all foursquare behind Zionism and Israel in its assault on the Palestinians. Does this constitute a definable Jewish collective engaged in advancing Jewish interests? Officially, perhaps not, but effectively, when one notes the remarkable unanimity of intent of all these bodies, the answer may well be yes. They do not, of course, represent all Jews, nor are all individual Jews responsible for their actions, but nonetheless, the Jews, organized, active, and effective Jews, are as responsible for the pursuit of Jewish interests in Palestine and elsewhere as the Americans in Vietnam, the French in Algeria, and the British in India. So, why should our response be different? Why should the Jews not be as accountable as the Americans, and even ordinary Jews as accountable as ordinary Americans? Why do we not picket the offices of the Anti-Defamation League, or the Conference of Presidents, or the offices, or even the homes of Abe Foxman, Edgar Bronfman, and Mort Zuckerman in the US, and Neville Nagler in the UK? Why do we not heckle Alan Dershowitz in the US, and Melanie Phillips in the UK? What about the UK chief rabbi, who in his time has had lots to say about Israel and Palestine? Why do we not take the struggle to every synagogue and Jewish community center in the world? After all, every Shabbat, a prayer is said for the state of Israel in every mainstream synagogue in the land, most of which are focal points for Zionist propagandizing and fundraising. So why should these Jews who choose to combine their prayers and their politics be immune while at prayer from our legitimate protests at their politics? And for those few Jews who are really prepared to stand up and be counted for their solidarity with Palestinians, why can we not still give to them due honor and regard as we did to those few Americans who opposed American imperialism and those white South Africans who opposed apartheid? The answer is that we are frightened. Even knowing that Jews are responsible and should be held accountable, still we are frightened. We are frightened because criticism of Jews, with its woeful history of violence and discrimination, seems just too dangerous a position to take. It may open the floodgates to a burst of Jew hatred. We are frightened that if we were to discuss the role of Jews in this conflict and in other areas and begin to hold Jews accountable, we might be labeled anti-Semites and lose support. And perhaps most of all, we are frightened of the conflicted inner passions that confound us all whenever we come to look at these things. Does speaking the truth about Jewish identity, power, and history lead to Jews being led to concentration camps and ovens? Of course it doesn't. It is hatred, fear, and the suppression of free thought and speech which leads to these things, whether the hatred, fear, and suppression is directed against Jews or by Jews. Anyway, despite efforts to convince us to the contrary, we do not live in the 13th century. Californians are unlikely to pour out of their cinemas showing Mel Gibson's Passion chanting "Death to the Jews." And at a time when Jews in Israel, Palestine, overwhelmingly backed by Jewish organizations in the West, are desecrating churches and mosques wholesale and brutally oppressing entire Christian and Muslim populations, we may be forgiven for finding it hard to get excited about graffiti daubed on some synagogue somewhere. If we were to begin to engage with the role of Jews in this conflict, we may well be labeled anti-Semites, and we may well, initially at least, lose support. The anti-Semite curse has long served as a frightener to silence all criticism of Jews, Israel, and Zionism, and undoubtedly will be used to discredit our cause. But so what? They call us anti-Semites anyway, so what's to lose? Edward Said spent a lifetime picking his way through the Israel, Zionism, Judaism minefield, and never once criticized Jews, and he was called an anti-Semite his whole life, right up to and even after his death. As a movement, we have probably spent as much time being nice to Jews as we have speaking up for Palestinians. And for what? Where has it got us? We are not racists, and we are not anti-Semites, so let them do their worst. We shall speak our minds. For so long now, Jews have told the world that black is white, and not only that, but also if anyone should dare to deny that black is white, they will be denounced as anti-Semites, with all the attendant penalties. We are held in a moral and intellectual lock, the intention of which has been to silence all criticism of Israeli and Jewish power. In saying the unsayable, we may set ourselves and others free, and think how it will feel the next time you are called an anti-Semite to say, well, I don't know about that, but I do have some very strong but legitimate criticisms to make of Jews and the way they are behaving, and I intend to speak out. And you never know. We may be pleasantly surprised. Israel Shamir, who has no trouble whatsoever in calling a Jew, was cheered spontaneously recently when he introduced himself from the floor at a London Solidarity meeting. I saw it with my own eyes. His first English language book has just been published. He corresponds freely and reciprocally with many highly respected figures and is on the boards of advisors of the Association for One Democratic State in Palestine and of Deir Yassin Remembered. Perhaps it's all just a case of the emperor's new clothes. Perhaps we're all just waiting for some innocent child to blow the whistle. The situation facing the Palestinian people is truly terrible. Old political strategies have got us nowhere. We need a new and widened debate. It may be that a new and credible discourse, which puts Jews and Jewishness at the critical center of our discussions, is part of that. And one final point. In a previous piece, paraphrasing Mark Ellis, I wrote, "To the Christian and to the entire non-Jewish world, Jews say this. You will apologize for Jewish suffering again and again and again. And when you have done apologizing, you will then apologize some more. When you have apologized sufficiently, we will forgive you, provided that you let us do what we want in Palestine." Shamir took me to task. Eisen is too optimistic. He said, Palestine is not the ultimate goal of the Jews, the world is. Well, I don't know about that, but if, as now seems likely, the conquest of Palestine is complete and the state of Israel stretches from Tel Aviv to the Jordan River, what can we expect? Will the Jews of Israel, supported by Jews outside of Israel, now obey the law, live peaceably behind their borders, and enjoy the fruits of their victory, or will they want more? Who's next? The crime against the Palestinian people is being committed by a Jewish state with Jewish soldiers using weapons displaying Jewish religious symbols and with the full support and complicity of the overwhelming mass of organized Jews worldwide. But to name Jews as responsible for this crime seems impossible to do.
F. Scott Fitzgerald, quote, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. One should, for example, be able to see that things are hopeless and yet be determined to make them otherwise. This philosophy fitted on to my early adult life when I saw the improbable, the implausible, often the impossible, come true."
What is our common bond truly? Freedom. Freedom. Without freedom, you can't be a Christian no matter what denomination you belong to. You can't be a Buddhist. You can't own a donut shop. You can't drive from here to Oregon. You can't be an American because that's what it's all about, and it's the only thing that it's all about, nothing else. Nothing else. It's about freedom. Only freedom.